All right, guys, welcome to the Movement Basics workshop of the 10% Fitter Method release. So today what we're going to do is we're going to cover 7 fundamental movements that are basically a regression of every single movement out there, right? If you know how to do these 7 movements, every exercise, every movement out there is somehow, some shape, some form of these, one of these movements. So before we really dive into it, let's introduce, thank first of all Perspective Force. Perspective Force is a corporate coaching company that helps to sponsor 10% Fitter show, but ultimately 10% Fitter is the health category of the Perspective Force company. Perspective Force is a corporate coaching company that has 7 of the major umbrellas under one roof, 7 major umbrellas of coaching under one roof. And basically we help to bring the human being to the center of competitive advantage for organizations. But anyway, so 10% Fitter, it's not just about fitness. It's not just about exercise. It's not just about nutrition. It's not just about being thinner. It's using health as a vehicle towards a thriving life in a business, whether it's an individual or organization that we work with. 10% Fitter helps people to do that. And Fitter, we have a specific acronym that we use within 10% Fitter because it represents true level of fitness in modern world. It's not just about running faster, doing more push-ups, or having a six-pack. It's about being forward-thinking, intrinsically motivated, tenaciously passionate, trusting in self, emotionally intelligent, and most importantly, resilient to external. When we are truly healthy, when we get to a place where we optimize our health, that's how we are. That's how we operate, as that acronym illustrates. My name is Coach Anton. I'm a healthy life coach. I both coach in life and health and identity and, any category of health you can name it. That's really my background. But over the last 3 years, I've shifted over into life coaching because I want to help people to have a thriving life and really setting their identity. But anyway, let's dive into the presentation. Let's talk first about why movement matters. Why is it that it's important to move? Now, guys, notice within 10% Fitter, we use a very specific term. We say movement. We do not use the word exercise because oftentimes people think exercise is about conventionally going to the gym, lifting weights, sweating. It's not just about that. Exercise is a component of movement. There's more to movement than just exercise. So movement matters because of many reasons. One is mental health, right? Right now, I don't know when you're going to watch this recording, but right now I'm recording this during coronavirus outbreak, right? So we're all isolated right now. We're all sitting at home. I don't know what's going to come out later when you're going to watch this, but it's important to move for mental health. If you sit at home isolated and you're not doing movement, you're going to have problems. You got to move to release some endorphins, some good feelings and things like that. Movement for metabolism, right? Even outside of coronavirus and all these things, when you don't move for 60 minutes at a time, science shows that your resting metabolism plummets, which means your caloric expenditure plummets, your energy goes down. All these things happen. So even just moving a little bit for 5 minutes every hour will drastically help you. It helps you with focus. It helps you with weight management. It helps you with mood, it helps you with mental health. It has so many different things. The other aspect of it is movement creates dysfunction, improper movement, right? So movement dysfunction occurs because we sit too much. We do things that we're not designed to do repetitively, right? So we're not designed to sit like this for a long period of time. Our glutes become dysfunctional. That makes our body then create compensation patterns that make it do things that it's not designed for, right? And then we start to move with pain. You know how distracting back pain can be, knee pain, joint pain in general? So we need to understand those repetitive functions create that. Or if you're in a task, or you're in a job, that you're doing a lot more of a certain way of engaging muscles than the opposite of it, you're going to create an imbalance. So that's why this movement workshop is designed to show you what it's ultimately all about, right? What these things are trying to present to you and then show you guys what we're trying to do with this function and how we're trying to correct it and make sure we avoid it. So let's dive into the presentation from here next. Before we dive into covering specific movements you're going to be learning that are fundamental movements that translate into every movement in the universe, I want to make sure that you understand something that very often I see when people work out is incorrect. They're not paying attention to their different floors in their body. You're like, different floors? What does that mean? It doesn't mean you have multiple floors on the ground. It just means different floors to pay attention to. So the things that people usually pay attention to when they move is their hips and their knees. Some may look at shoulders, kind of chest, right? But ultimately there's more than that. So the first one you want to look at is your feet. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, especially in squats. because what happens is they don't have strong feet. They don't have strong arches. So when you look down at my feet right now, they're in a proper position. My arch is nice and tight. They're up, and I feel support throughout my feet. As I'm moving, they're absorbing a lot of that shock. What I often see with many of you, and I sometimes have issues with too, is a collapsed arch. So what you see here, instead of being where you see my foot is going directly into my ankle, right now it's going to collapse, right? So here you go, as a breakdown. So instead of my foot, or my leg coming directly into the center of my foot, it kind of goes and collapses to where my arch should be, right? So you can see straight, collapsed, straight, collapsed. And many of you will squat like this, will move like this, and it breaks the whole chain down. So if something's broken with the feet, it's going to have the whole pattern off. So the first thing we want to do is kind of push the big pad of the toe and the big toe down. Many of you are weak here. Your big toes are weak. I know it seems like a weird thing to say, but I promise you, it creates a lot of movement issues if your big toes are weak. So push that down. You can see already the arch is starting to tighten up. Then you're going to corkscrew your feet in, right? So I'm going to screw my feet in to where the outsides of my feet are getting firm into the ground, nice and strong. From there, I'm going to look at my knees. With knees, your knees shouldn't be moving directly straight, right? They're not moving straight over the big toe. Your knees should be moving over the second toe from the outside. So slightly to the outside of your feet, a little bit bow-legged. That's a proper knee movement when you're executing squats or anything for that matter when you're moving. From there is your hip floor. So this one, there's a couple points to point out, especially when you're doing single leg, like lunges or anything like step-ups and offset. You see people dip one hip and one hip rises. Weak abs, right? Weak hip stability, weak abdominals. They can't keep those hips stable. So you want to make sure that if you had a bar across your body like this, that when you're moving, it's not moving one side to the other, staying nice and even. The other side of hips I want you to consider is going to be your pelvic tilt. So oftentimes, because you sit so much, your glutes get weak and your lower belly gets weak, and what that creates is an anterior pelvic tilt. So your pelvis tilts down. So instead of being flat, now my pelvis is kind of pointing in a downward direction. You can see lumbar curve, my lower back is curved. That's not good. So what should be is my pelvis should be neutral, right? Now my back is nice and flat, my hips are underneath me, my body's supported by my glutes, and it's on line straight. Sometimes, very rarely, people will have a posteriorly tilted pelvis where they're overly tucked in. I very rarely see that, because most of you actually need a little bit of a posterior tilt when you're doing your exercises to correct the interior tilt that you have issues with. From there, we're looking at the chest floor. Many times people don't think about it, but it's your rib cage, right? Where is your rib cage aligning to? It should be aligned just like your hips, flat to the ground. So a lot of times you see people when they have overly tight lats, right? And they'll put their bar on their back and they'll pop their rib up. Now the rib cage is pointing in the upward direction. And what's happening at the same time, it arched my back, my hips are now pointing in a downward direction, while my chest, or my rib cage is pointing up. That's not good. A lot of compression going out through the spine. They should be flat. So here I want to make sure that it's also not downward. I don't want to overload my back and not open up my chest and be downward. Nice and flat once again here. Last piece is your neck, your chin, that region. So once again, neutrality, looking for a flat floor. Imagine you had a tennis ball underneath your chin when you're moving it. And I've had clients do it with tennis balls. You put your tailbone on the chin, that makes the chin be nice and straight. Chin is tucked in. If I open my neck and I'm moving, the tennis ball is going to fall out. I can't close my chin too much and look down because the tennis ball is there. So it keeps that neutral neck alignment, and that's really key. So make sure when you start to execute and learn all these different movement patterns, you pay attention to these different floors. If you're seeing them break down as you're doing the movement pattern, you need to regress that movement until you can execute it perfectly with all the floors being aligned, and then progress it back
Anyway,
up.
so now we're going to talk about squat. With squats, I want you guys to not be afraid of squats. Squats are, many people are like, oh, you're going to destroy your knees, you're going to blow your back out. Guys, if you move properly, squat is one of the best exercise for you for longevity. Mind you, when I talk to movement within 10% Fitter, it's not just about like exercise. It's more have to do with functionality of your body, moving pain-free, not being distracted with back pain, knee pain, and most importantly, being able to move well into your 70s, 80s, and 90s if you live that long, right? I never want your mind to be alive, but your body to be dead. And for these reasons, we're talking about these kind of things. So With squats, guys, let's cover that as the next movement pattern. So now we're going to break down the squat, just like we talked about all the different things. Feel free to ask any questions you may have during this time, and after the video goes through, I'll go over and answer any that may come up. I'm going to show you first the basic squat, and then I'll go over a couple movements just through pictures of how to progress your squats from foundational to being able to use a barbell squat on your back. So let's take a look at the next video right now. Now we're going to move into one of the most important fundamental movements that you have. And this movement causes a lot of problems in the gym, and if used correctly, has a lot of positive outcomes from it, and it's a squat. Many people will tell you that squats are bad for you, don't squat because of your knees, because people squat improperly. If you squat properly, how your body is designed to, like how a baby squats, you're actually going to have positive corrections that are going to alleviate pain, strengthen your back, strengthen your glutes, strengthen your core, and many other body parts, and be really, really positive for you. So with squats, before I even get into covering how to engage the body always engages from the center out. So meaning that what muscles fire and tighten up first before we move on to the next muscles. So the very first muscle is the core. Core is our powerhouse. I don't care what is the movement that you're doing out of these 7 movements. Core is going to engage first. And then from there, we're going to go to our next joint. So usually you go core, right? Then we have next what? Hips, and we have our shoulders. From there, further away, we have our knees, we have our elbows. From there, we have our ankles, and we have our wrists. I'll talk about this later on, but as an example, with rows, right, when you're doing a pulling motion, oftentimes I see people pull too much from extremities, meaning they're trying to pull from their wrist. So what happens is they end up rounded like this, and that's not a row. They're actually not using a lot of their back muscles. They're pulling a lot from their arms. Why? Because they're thinking about working from outside in, not from the inside out. So if I engage my core first, then I'm going to anchor my shoulders, right, and then I'm going to finish the pull. I'm going to cover that later in a row, but the point is, we have to exercise from the core to the extremities, not the other way around. So with squat, the first thing that happens is I engage my abs. So think about this. Right now, my abs are open. I'm a visual person, and I hope you are too. It helps to visualize these things. Right now, your abs are open, and they're nice and big like this, right? So what I want to do here is I want to compress them and squeeze and tighten. So imagine this big open square tightening up into a small little square. And I'm going to hold that tight little square the entire time I'm squatting. Because what's going to happen is my hip bones and my bottom of my ribs are going to kind of slowly connect. Not going to fully connect, but that's what I'm doing is I'm squeezing them together. And I'm going to funnel my ribs in like this, my sides in, to create nice, tight little hollow body. Your belly shouldn't be poking out. It should be poking in, I should say, kind of sticking inward, right? So from there, now my core is engaged. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break my hips. What I mean by that, that's the first joint that's going to work. Because a lot of times I see people when they squat, this is a fundamental mistake that I see many folks do. They squat and they break their knees first. So what happens? When I break my knees first, this happens, and now all my weight is in their quads, knees are going to hurt, and it's an improper movement. And even if I kind of correct it afterwards, it's still a lot of tension to the knee joint. The first thing that needs to break is you got to sit back a little bit, right? So you're going to break that hip joint first. Bam, just a little bit. Then the knees can go after that. So know that that's the first thing that happens. From there, what you want to consider is what kind of squat are you doing? There is a lot of debate out there. What's bad, what's good? Your knees should stay behind the toes. It's okay if your knees go over your toes. It depends on who you talk to, guys, because if you're talking to a power lifter, there's 2 main forms of squats. There's many subcategories, but 2 main forms, right? When it comes down to a barbell squat. You have your power lifter squat and you have your weight lifter squat, Olympic lifter, right? So Olympic lifters, think about snatches and, clean and jerks and things like that. We've covered that in the past. With them, they're very much upright, right? So when they're going down, their knees move forward and their chest is really, really tall. So when they pop up, right, they're able to catch everything nice and upright. Their squats are going to be moving like this. They carry in a high bar position, which means the bar is sitting on top of their shoulders, and they're going to let their knees come forward and stay nice and upright, come back out of it. Now, power lifter squat, which is kind of, I guess I'm doing both, depends on what I'm training for, but that one is going to be a little bit different. In a power lifter squat, your knees are actually not going to move forward. It's all about the hips. You're going to get a little bit of wider base typically in a power lifter squat, and you're going to sit back. Watch my knees. You see how they're not really coming forward. Everything is loaded posteriorly here. My quads, very minimal work. So I've had clients, women, very dominant with quads. Women are just like that in general. So a lot of times we'll do a lot of power lifter squats to get their glutes to engage better and not to overwork their quads. So no, they're very different. With power lifter, sit back. With weightlifter, you kind of come forward. And you have a low bar and a high bar. And a low bar in a power lifter, it's more across, kind of like a little bit above the shoulder blades. With weightlifter, it's more above on the neck. So those are your fundamental squat movements, remember. So forward view, knees slightly out, arches nice and firm, belly's tucked, and all you're going to do is just squat forward. Everything's nice and even, and come back. Now we're going to move into one of the most important...
All right, guys, so you just saw what a squat should look like, right? And that is just a very beginner movement. That is just where you're starting out with. It's going to have many progressions along the way, and there's many ways to advance it. It's not just about throwing more weight on. That's what people think, is just progressing a movement requires more weight. Sometimes adding weight is too much for the system. Your movement mechanics start to break down. So the things that you see on the screen that I'm talking about, you start to put too much weight on because your ego, your desire to get to where you want to be faster, whatever it may be, is acting up, and you end up getting injured. Or if you're just starting out, you end up creating wrong patterns. These wrong patterns may not hurt you in the beginning, but down the road they'll either create a limitation, meaning a low ceiling that you can't really get too much stronger, or they'll create injury and problems well down the road. So these are some examples of progressing, right? So if you start with a body weight squat, you see there on the left side, the lady has just got nothing in her hands. She's just squatting down. That's the typical, kind of weightlifter squat that we just talked about. Her knees are moving forward. And guys, that is okay. You just don't want them to excessively move forward. But more importantly, you want to make sure that the weight here is distributed evenly. When you look at her feet in all of those squats, you see that her feet are slightly pointing out, 1 o'clock and 11 o'clock, but they're nice and flat. They're not all in the toe to where the heel is lifting up. That's really key, guys, because otherwise knee injuries will happen if you don't sit back into your foot. So from there, you progress into your goblet squat. A goblet squat is where you're going to use basically a dumbbell, or you can carry a gallon of milk. I was going to actually bring that out today, but I decided not to. But a gallon of milk in your hands, and you're holding it nice and tight. See how her elbows are against her side? She's holding her core nice and strong. And the reason you start with weight to the front in squats instead of weight to the back, it's because it loads your core more when the weight's in the front. It doesn't load your back. And some of you are not ready for these kind of movements because you're going to tweak your spine. There's not enough stability there. So for that reason, you want to hold the weight in the front from the beginning. Then from there, she progresses to a barbell. Why a barbell after the dumbbell? Because there is no mobility required in your lats and in your upper back kind of to be able to get the elbows up. Many of you may not be able to do this if you're tight. If you sit a lot and your upper back is rounded, this will be a very challenging movement. So you may have to progress and work on mobility before you get there. And then finally, you get into the barbell squat with the barbells on the back. Remember, 2 different barbell squats. Weightlifter and powerlifter. Weightlifter, we got your knees coming forward, chest is upright, bar is sitting high on the neck. Powerlifter, body's sitting back, knees are not moving forward, mostly posterior chain, hip work, and the bar is sitting nice and low across your traps, kind of well below your neck. So just know those progressions. So from there, we're going to get into your next movement, which is going to be a hinge. A hinge is something that many injuries happen in life, guys. If you don't watch anything else, at least just watch this one, because this is where I see majority of people do this wrong in the gym. People squat a hinge all the time. That means that they try to go pick a weight up, and instead of moving their hips back and hinging over them and then moving them forward, they try to squat and pick it up, and they blow out their backs in the process. So let's watch the next exercise video and see what that looks like. Alright guys, the second movement we're going to go over is a hinge. And a lot of times when you're picking things off the ground, you're usually going to use a hinge and not a squat. And the reason many people end up getting hurt with their back
is because people try to deadlift, lift a dead weight off the ground with a squat, and it creates problems. So a hip hinge is a little bit different. Now, whether it's a squat, whether it's a hinge, it doesn't matter, but it becomes a little bit even more important in a hinge. You need a neutral spine. So that's why I have this weird stick here. Actually, it's a ruler. Doesn't need to be a ruler. You guys can use a broomstick, whatever it may be, PVC pipe, right? I'm just going to teach you to have 3 points of contact when you're moving. And this is a good introduction to a hinge movement as well. But right, when you're picking something up and your hips are hinging or you're squatting, right, you should be able to bend over and not have any change in where the bars, or so where the stick is connected to my body. So my head is connected, my upper back is connected, and my tailbone is connected. Oftentimes what I see when you guys move, what you'll do is you'll either disconnect your head and you kind of get that rounded upper back, or you'll lower down and you'll round your spine. So then the stick comes off the bottom, it's no longer touching down here. That's because you're rounding your spine. The spine's not staying rigid and strong, and that creates issues. It's not supposed to be moving during exercises. So practice with a stick as you're learning these movements, right? So with a hip hinge, what I usually do is I have people stand about 6 feet behind a wall. Because what I want you to learn when you're doing a hinge, it's not an up and down movement, right? Squat is kind of like bodies coming down, bodies coming up. Hinge is a little bit different. With a hinge, body's coming back, right? So we're kind of shooting back, and now body's coming forward. So it's more of a front to back kind of movement than it is an up and down movement, even though the weight is coming up at the same time. But I want you to think in your head that's what you're doing. So the wall is about 6 inches behind you. With straight legs, all you're going to do is learn how to push back with a neutral spine, touch that wall, and then push your hips forward, squeeze that butt, lock it in, right? So neutral spine, push back, touch that wall, feel the hamstrings, feel the calves get nice and tight, and then you squeeze, push forward. Now, when you go to stand up, this is another thing that people do wrong. Imagine you're doing a deadlift now, right? That's what a hinge movement ultimately is. You're picking up a weight off the ground. So what people do is they try to lift with their backs. You see how my hips are not really doing a whole lot? My back is doing the lifting. I'm pulling up with my spine. That's not what you want to do. Think about it when you're lifting a weight. It doesn't matter if it's a deadlift with a barbell or if you're lifting your kid off the ground, whatever it may be. Hips need to be nice and open, but then what you're going to do is you're going to push into the floor. It's leg drive, not back drive, that lifts that weight up. So you're going to stand up, get it down low, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about pushing that floor away. Notice how my back is still staying down, staying down, staying down. Now once the weight is above my knees, now I'm going to drive with my back muscles as I'm driving my hips and stand up nice and tall. But that did not happen until the weight was clear past my knees. It was all leg drive, push floor, 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 drive all the way up. So with a hinge, that's really, really important, guys. Push the floor away, sit back, push forward. Don't try to squat a hinge. That's why many people get hurt. All right.
So many injuries happen like that happen. I see this probably being squats and hinges are the biggest reasons that people get hurt in the gym, but it's also outside the gym. Like I said, you go to pick things up and you end up squatting a hinge. Your back does not stay neutral. As you can see is in the pictures on the board, and no matter what movement she's doing, her back is in neutral position. It's not rounded like this, nor is it excessively arched. And that's really key, because until you can have a strong core, you shouldn't be doing some of these movements in a more advanced format. So progressions of these, right? In a very left side to right side is how they're progressing. First one you're going to see is body weight Romanian deadlift. Initially, you want to start with straight legs, because the left joints are moving, the easier it is for the brain to kind of keep up and make sure that we're doing proper movement patterns. Because in the Romanian deadlift, there's very minimal knee flexion. So it's basically straight legged, just minimal knee flexion, and maybe no knee flexion if you're very flexible and your hamstrings have good flexibility. So you just kind of, she reaches down and then she comes back up. This is how I start with clients, and I said 6 feet on the video, I meant 6 inches. Of course, don't stand 6 feet behind a wall and try to reach it, but 6 inches behind the wall, and then you're trying to push back, hinge over, and let your butt slightly touch it, and then push forward. You get conditioned to setting back. You get conditioned to feeling hamstrings and back of your legs get really, really tight. Because if you don't sit back, when you go to lower, there's not enough space for your spine to stay flat. It's going to have to round in order to reach that weight, and that's where the problem comes in.
So from the Romanian deadlift, you go to dumbbell RDL. Now it's the same thing, Roman deadlift, straight-legged. We're just having a little bit of a load added with a dumbbell. From there, you get a barbell. It's a little bit more harder, a little bit more complex. Now we have to hold our lats flat. Then you go to full depth, regular deadlift with a dumbbell. From there, you use your trap bar. Trap bars are easier to hold because your weights are on your side. So your hands are positioned right over the center of gravity. Their back is not as loaded because you're loaded more on your hips. But when your hands are in front of you, it's a little bit more challenging because there's a little bit more leverage on the back. So if the core isn't strong enough, it becomes more and more harder. So you can see in the second to last picture of the progression, she's lifting off platforms. That way she doesn't have to go as low, making sure the spine is able to stay neutral. If you're really tight, guys, this is really key. If you're lifting heavy and you want to push deadlifts, but you're really tight, but you still want to be able to do it, you can do it off platforms like this and be able to still avoid hamstring flexibility issues. If you have tight hamstrings and you try to go too deep in deadlifts, it's going to become a problem. So sometimes I have clients do it off platforms. So from there, we're going to get into our next movement here, just looking for which one we're on, and that's going to be a lunge. So that's the one we're going to cover next. With lunges, guys, I can't stand lunges. I'm not a huge fan of them because they show you your weaknesses. A lunge will show you your weakness like nobody's business, and that's why many people don't love them, because if you're really strong on both feet, but your core is unstable and you're having some compensation patterns going on, a lunge will quickly break down and show you where your weaknesses are. So let's get into this one next and cover your lunge movement. The next movement that we're going to go over is a lunge. A lunge is very important because the other exercises are very even, meaning that both feet are down at the same plane. With a lunge, we're offsetting. So it's going to be slightly different for our body, a lot more core engagement. And what I see a lot of times with the lunge is people simply do it wrong because they end up walking a tightrope. This is one of the biggest fundamental issues that I see. People feel like they're stepping out, they're moving one foot in front of the other. Now guys, remember when I told you about hips? They should always be aligned, right? So look at what's happening right now. As I move one foot in front of the other, my hips actually point inward. So right now, I'm not loading my glutes properly because my legs are closed off. So we are shoulder width apart with our hips. We should be lunging shoulder width apart. I even teach people to lunge out a little bit just to get them conditioned to have that open leg as they're doing it, right? So you're gonna step out. Now, actually, before anything, let's do reverse lunges. Reverse lunges are the easiest lunges because they don't put as much force on your knees. So you stand up nice and tall, nice and upright. Remember, foot floor. Even in lunges, we want to make sure we have good foot floor. Our abs are engaged, our pelvis is aligned, everything how it should be. And all I'm going to do now is step back. Now I should probably get a little bit more space here. I'm going to step back. I'm going to lower down. Notice that knee is not quite touching. Now what's important here is this knee is not pointing in. This is what I see a lot of times. People will point this knee inward and that loads their hip really bad. The knee should be out, right? We're pointing everything straight in. Hips are aligned, coming down. That knee is tracking over that second toe, just like I told you guys in the squat. The same thing applies in that situation as it did with the squat, even though we're offset with one leg forward, right? So you're here, then you're just gonna step back. Sorry, I was doing reverse lunges to step forward. Getting a little confused here. All right, so once again, step back, drop down, step forward, come back up. Notice my hips. As I'm going down, see how this hip dropped? I need to make sure that we're not doing this, that we're staying nice and upright and our hips are staying even. So that's going to be your guys' lunge. You can progress into forward lunges, moving lunges, and different things like that, but just make sure that hips are even, chest to floor, everything's good, and the knee is pointing slightly out, not slightly in. Okay, the next move. All right, guys, so that was lunges. Now let's look at how to progress them from basics to more advanced versions of them, right? So you're gonna have your split squat is gonna be the very first one. So a difference, there's a little bit of confusion out there when people use the words squat or a lunge, and a split squat and a lunge kind of combination, right? Split squat, it just means that your feet are gonna be apart, like you would be lunging, but you're not moving. There's really not locomotion with it where you're moving one foot forward and one foot back and you're doing walking lunges. You're just staying stationary with 2 feet in the same same position, lowering down and coming back up. Making sure that first, all the alignment is where it needs to be. The torso is upright, core is strong, hips are aligned, knees are pointing where they are. And most importantly, your feet are shoulder width apart and you're not trying to walk that tightrope that I mentioned in the video. From there, you're going to progress into a reverse lunge, which is what you saw in the video. Stepping back, stepping forward. Now, many of you already be maybe there. I'm just saying, if you're not able to do a split squat correctly, you shouldn't be worried about reverse lunges. First, get your split squats down. Or if your reverse lunges are bad, go back down to split squats and make sure that you master those before going back up. And the same thing works for entire chain of progression. So then the next one's going to be a forward lunge, right? So now you're actually stepping forward. The reason it's harder is there's a lot more force coming down because the leg that's holding most of the weight is going to be the landing leg versus the weight in the reverse lunge, the leg that's holding most of the weight is still the standing leg, like it's the launch leg, so it's a little bit easier. From there, you get into your back foot elevated split squat, Bulgarian lunge, right? So you have that fourth picture, so second from the right, second column from the right, second row from the right. You have your back foot is a little bit elevated, right? So we're now in the same position. We're not actually moving. You're just staying in a position, but now it's harder because your back foot is elevated. More weight is being put on the front leg, and it's more challenging. Now, from there, you're going to have your front foot elevated forward lunge, right? And that's where this person has that foot is on top of it. It's not this, the riser is not behind him this time, it's in front of him this time. So now it's a lot more stability it's required because the range of motion is increased, right? Because that front foot is elevated. So it becomes more difficult. And then the last one's kind of the walking lunge, and you kind of move through, step out, step back down. So those were the lunges, guys. The next one we're going to get into is a combination. This video will cover 2 movements, and then just like before, we'll go through the progressions to show you what the difference is between, the two. And also there is 2 different planes of motions on top of the push-pull that you have here, right? You have your, first you have your push, right? You have your horizontal push, but then you also have your vertical push. Well, the same thing happens with your pulls. You have your horizontal pull, which is your regular row, and then you have your vertical pull, which is a lat pull down, right? So different progressions, but let's watch the video first and see what's going on there. All right, the next 2 movements that I need to cover, I'm going to cover at the same time. A push and a pull. So they're opposing movements, right? And a lot of times people have imbalances because they A, do them wrong, but B, they do too much of one and not enough of the other. Oftentimes it's too much pushing, not enough pulling in life, creates rounded shoulders, a lot of, compensation patterns, things like that. But ultimately, what are we doing when we're pushing and pulling? So what I want you to understand, these kind of exercises, they're your rows, they're your lat pull downs, chest presses, flies, back flies, shoulder presses, raises, those kind of things, right? So one of the biggest issues I see is people forget about their core. Right? People are moving and they're not thinking about, like we talked about in the past, center to the extremities. They're just thinking about lifting from that wrist or whatever it may be, or pulling from it, and there's issues. So once again, whether you're pushing or pulling, first things first, tighten up your abs. Guess what? You think that your glutes should be weak even though it's a shoulder exercise? Absolutely not. Everything in the body needs to be tight. The tighter you are, the better control you're going to have. The more explosiveness, the more strength, the more, awareness you're going to have in your body. So first things first, right? We got the abs tightened up. We got our glutes tightened up. If we're doing a press, we're going to go up and down, right? What's happening here is I'm keeping my rib cage down. What's oftentimes I see happen in the shoulder press is people pop their ribs when they go up. Nope, your chest should be up, but your ribs should be down. Everything's tight. If I'm keeping that square nice and tight like we talked about in the past, I shouldn't be able to pop my ribs. If I'm popping my ribs, it means I let go of my abs. If I let go of my abs, what does that mean? Now I've got compression in my back, and when I'm pressing, I'm going to have issues. So people are like, oh, shoulder presses are bad for your back, shoulder presses. Like, no, wrong shoulder presses are bad. If you're doing correctly, everything's totally fine and actually good for you. So we got our core down, we're pressing through the shoulders, engage your lats. Make sure your back muscles are tight. That's what's controlling the shoulders. If these muscles are tight, they're going to keep the shoulder nice and low, and it's not going to hike up to your neck. If you're not using your back to stabilize the shoulders, oftentimes the neck will do it, and then you'll see this thing happening, where the shoulder's hiking up and you're trying to use your neck muscles to control it. Your shoulder needs to be sitting in a nice controlled position, whether you're doing a chest press, whether you're doing a shoulder press, whether you're doing a pull, like a row or a lat pull down. You should always have that shoulder nice and tight and being controlled by your back muscles. They're keeping it engaged, your lower traps, your big old lats. Your rhomboids, all those muscles in the back of your body should be keeping them down. So now when you're pressing, same thing. Those muscles are nice and strong. If they're not strong, what you'll see will happen, you will overextend. Your shoulders will round, your back will round, and you'll overload your deltoid in the front and create issues with your rotator cuff. So if shoulders are nice and strong because the back is supported, ribs are down, when I go to press, I'll only press this far. My shoulders are not going to overextend. So when you're pressing, think about driving a little bit through your lats, right? You're keeping your back tight to help support your chest as you're doing it. I don't want to see your shoulders hiking up. You want to keep them down as you're doing it. The other thing is your ribs. Don't pop up your ribs, even if you're laying down flat on the bench. The same thing. Improper movement. Engage your abs. With a pull, that's a little bit different, right? We talked about that a while ago, but we want to make sure we're initiating the pull from the elbows, right? Really kind of the shoulders, but ultimately imagine you're not trying to pull, whether you're pulling down or pulling up, pull this thing closer to your body through your wrist, because that's going to make you rounded like this. You're pulling, imagine tiny little strings attached at your elbows, and those tiny little strings is driving your elbows back. See how my chest is staying open, and now my back is doing a proper pull. And then nice and back forward. Once again, elbows initiate the pull, pull through, nice and strong. What you're not seeing here is my chest is not rotating down. That's a lot of times where I see people pulling because they're pulling improperly. They're rounding and they're rotating their shoulders down like that. It shouldn't be like that. We're coming into extension with our back. Our upper back and our neck shouldn't be going forward. This is a lot of times I see people doing the rowing. They're like this. That's improper. In stressing your neck out. Should be nice and strong, coming into extension. Nice long neck. The tennis ball is still under my chin. Right? So that's going to be your pulling and pushing move. Right.
So starting out with the first one is going to be the horizontal push. Progression of the horizontal push. So you see a push-up on there, and the very top left corner is the regression of the push-up. Very bottom left corner is going to be the progression, full-on push-up. So you start with body weight. Before you worry about using dumbbells, barbells, guys, master your own body first. If you can't exercise with your own body, you shouldn't be exercising with weight. So the thing is, you hear the words of men and women push-up. Guys, that's bogus. There's no such thing. I know women that can do more push-ups than men, and you know, obviously vice versa. So what we're talking about here with a horizontal push, with a push-up, when you're starting out your push-ups, I've seen this with so many clients. They want to start on the knees because somebody said, oh, it's easier, go on your knees. Going on your knees does not teach you to properly engage your core. 10% fitter method, we do not teach to do push-ups on your knees. Within 10% fitter method, we teach you to incline yourself. So imagine you're really deconditioned. Say maybe you're an elderly person. Doing a push-up against the wall to start out with, right? So maybe your feet are fairly close, then you start to walk your feet away, then you transition from a wall to a table, then from a table to a chair. Because your body's on an incline, it releases the amount of weight that's loaded on your arms, so it becomes easier. And then you gradually progress to the floor, and then you'll see that way when you start doing push-ups, you don't look like that noodle. You all know what I'm talking about. You do that push-up, the chest comes up, but the body's still down, right? And you're kind of doing this warm up and down. It's not a push-up. It's not going to help you with your core, and it's going to create back problems for you. So once you master the push-up, then start with dumbbells. Dumbbells are a little bit easier than barbells. They require more, or they allow for more movement, so there's more shoulder flexibility issues that can be basically forgiven with a dumbbell that may not be forgiven with a barbell, and then finally progress with the barbell. And guys, no, there's weightlifter presses and there's powerlifter pressers, just like in anything. With powerlifters, we go lower. We go almost to our belly button, and we kind of rock that weight back up like a cradle. With weightlifters, it's a little bit more on the chest, a little bit wider. Just don't get your shoulders super wide. This is the thing that I see with a push-up. People will get their shoulders way out here. Think what happens. Many of you, first of all, are too tight, myself included, and I stretch all the time. As soon as I go raise my shoulder because it's tight, it's rotating it in. So when I'm doing push-ups, I'm basically going to be doing them like this. It's not going to look like that because it's way out here, but that's what I want you to visualize. So not a good thing for your body.
You want your elbows to be about 45 degrees. And the other thing is, don't reach with your head. I see a lot of people reaching with their head. That rounds your upper back and it actually creates dysfunction in your chest. Pick your chin up, tuck that chin in, and then drop and lower down with your belly and your chest while your neck stays extended, guys. It's really, really key that you're doing that. So that's going to be your horizontal push. From horizontal push, we're going to get into your vertical push, right? We talked about 2 planes of motion. You have your pushes and pulls in horizontal and vertical planes. So the first one is a single arm dumbbell. Notice how when she's pressing, the bicep is right by the ear. I see people sometimes press in front or they're way out here. If you're tight, I understand, but always try to get your bicep right by your ear. Notice how the shoulder is staying anchored down. It's not elevating up here. You can still see space between my neck, just like you can see from her. Why? Because the back muscles are supporting that shoulder. I tighten these up, now it's controlled. If I let them go, then my neck wants to try to pull that shoulder up. So try to avoid that. Start with a single dumbbell, because if you have imbalances and issues, simply using one dumbbell at a time will help you. Once you master it and you don't notice when you're pressing your ribs are popping up, then you're good. Same thing, if you start progressing your weight and your ribs are popping up, you're not doing yourself a service. Take your ego out of working out. Take your ego out of moving. Do what you enjoy, do what feels like, and slowly progress. Consistency is going to be way more important. And finally, get to the barbell. Notice with the barbell, it's not in front of her. It's a full extension. Her arms are straight. The bar is slightly behind her head because it's lined up with her neck. It's a neutral position. So from there, now we're going to get into your horizontal pull, so your rows, variations of rows, right? First one I usually start with very basic movements, and that's going to be your these pictures. Sorry, I should organize these better. The picture on the right, I thought I had them right. Starting out first is an incline row. Because you're on an incline, the weight is not against you as much as it would be in a flat plane. You got to think about how gravity looks, or how gravity works. If I'm pulling straight up, it's harder. If I'm pulling diagonally, it's a little bit easier, right? So you start supported on that bench. That third picture that you see, she's face down on a bench, and then she's pulling. That thing in the front is going to create spinal alignment and spinal stability. Get you ready, and then progress to that inverted row. So the inverted row is the one you see on the very right hand side where she's pulling up to a barbell, right? Still using body weight. We're not progressing to anything too complex so you can get hurt. Get used to pulling. Notice she's not pulling to her chin, she's pulling to her chest. I usually say aim for your nipple line, kind of straight in the middle for a male, you know, sternum for a female, something like that. Obviously both of them. I just think for myself as a guy, I always think nipple line. And with women, of course, that could be different. But from there, single arm dumbbell row. Now we're progressing to a dumbbell. Always a dumbbell before a barbell. Because why? Unilateral is easier. Then we're using the bench to support. We still have some assistance from that bench. You're looking at the picture on a very left-hand side right there, right? So she's got one knee on the bench and one hand on the bench. So that knee and that hand on the other side is helping the body to stay flat and neutral while she pulls with the left. Now the core is strong. Now the body's aligned, but the joints are moving well. Now we can move into a barbell row. With barbell row is another one I see often injuries with. Just same reasons with deadlift. People don't sit back enough. See how she's sticking her butt out in that second picture with the barbell? It's to create space for the spine to be flat. If she didn't stick it out and she leaned forward, her body would round and her spine could get injured. So that's what we progress with horizontal rows. From there, the last one we got for the push-pull is going to be the vertical pull. So this is going to be your lat pull down or your pull-ups, right? Basically, pull-ups are a little bit harder. Where in all other exercises, you started with your own body weight and then you progress to using weights, right? With this one, you actually progress to your body weight because it's not easy to pull up. Like some of us weigh about 200 pounds. It's not easy to pull up 200 pounds. I mean, I can because I'm trained, but many people may not be able to. So you start with lat pull downs and you build your weight up. With lat pulls, guys, the biggest thing that I see is that people roll their shoulders. I showed that in the video, right? The people are pulling down and you see this number happening, right? Because they're pulling from here. They're pulling from internal rotators. They're not pulling from their back. When you pull from the back, it rotates the shoulders back and spine down and opens the chest. So that's what it should look like, pinching the shoulder blades underneath and below you as you drive the elbows into your sides. That's the proper way to do it. Then progress into assisted pull-up. You can use an assisted pull-up where you have like a band underneath your knee or your foot. In her case, she's got it under her left knee. And then you progress to a body weight pull-up. Of course, you have variations. You have chin-ups, which is going to be underhand. Pull-ups are overhand. And many of those types of variations should be utilized because you have many muscles in your back, and all different angles should be applied. So we got 2 more movements quickly to go over, and we'll finish up. So the next movement is going to be rotation. It's another reason that I see a lot of injuries happen is that a handout, no, but this is available on video, so I don't necessarily have any handouts available, but these videos are available on the YouTube channel. And if you go to the thing that you see on there, perspectiveforce.com/10% fitter, you can actually get access to all the recordings I've done. This is the 17th workshop or 18th workshop of 25. So if you guys need access to this, go to the thing on the screen, register, and it's not an immediate thing. I have to update you on the next one, but you will get access in the email to all of my workshops, guys. I'm going to make 25 of these. I already have 18 made, and they're all this in depth. This is not your quick social media bite to capture your attention. I'm literally teaching you everything you need to know to go from a couch potato to the healthiest individual you need to be. So sorry, no handouts on this one, guys, but yeah, check that out and you'll definitely find it. I appreciate the question though. All right, guys, so let's get into the rotations, right? With rotations, the reason we get screwed up is because people don't think about the stability for their spine when they're rotating. There's multiple different spines that exist in this video we're going to talk about here next. So let's dive into it without waiting any further. The next thing to cover is going to be rotation. Right? When people rotate, one of the biggest injuries that occur is when people rotate through their lower back. Your lower back is not meant to twist. It can bend and it can, extend, but it only has like 10 degrees of flexibility to rotate within it. Your rotation should come from your thoracic spine, right? So you have 3 pieces to your spine. You have your lumbar spine down here at the bottom. You have your thoracic spine, which kind of comes from mid-spine to neck, and then you have your cervical spine, which is your neck. So your T-spine is much more rotational than your lower back is. So when you're rotating, you should be rotating right underneath kind of like where your shoulder blades are. Don't rotate at the hips. That's going to create problems. If your hips rotate with your spine, that's fine. But what I see people do is they'll stay straight, but then they're rotating. It's rotating all the way down into the spine. That's not good. So if you're going to stay straight and stay nice and strong through the hips, then only rotate through that upper back portion. That's where that twist is going to happen. But once again, with the abs, when we're rotating, everything is in. Everything is funneled in and strong. We're not moving in that open position. So you can rotate, like I said, with the hip, right? If I'm doing a cable rotation, I can rotate with that hip. So my glute is strong. That's rotation is happening much lower than at my spine. I'm rotating through my leg. So my spine is not being hindered here, right? So I can rotate, press through, come back. The other thing is I can rotate without moving my hips. But now, once again, the rotation is only happening at the upper back. Notice my belly button is not really moving. I know you can't really see it in a shirt, but my belly button is not really going anywhere. That's really important. Protect your spine. But rotation is important, guys. You get really tight, and you sit down on a table and just try to rotate as far as you can, just holding your hands like that. You're going to notice some tightness and limitations in your back and why you need to foam roll and stretch your lats. The next thing to cover. Alright guys, so now you saw a basic rotation, and now let's progress, just like we've done with everything else, go from a fundamental easy one to a little bit more complex and advanced rotation, right? So the first one is a cable wood chop. So that's the top left corner that you see. The cable is above you, and then you're bringing it below you. It's like you're chopping wood, right? That's where that name comes from, a wood chop. And you start with a wood chop, and then to the right of it, then you progress into a hay bale. Do you notice the difference between the left and the right picture here? The top left and top right boxes. The cable position. One is above and one is below. And when the cable is above, it's much easier to pull it down because once again, gravity's working for us. We get to use our own weight to counterbalance the weight that we're pulling down. But then when we're pulling up, we're not able to do that because we are having to lift our own weight. On top of that, the weight of the cable and the weight attached to it. So it's a much more progressive movement. But start with those, and then from there, what's called a Pallof press. Pallof press is a very... It's not a complex movement, but I don't see a lot of people doing it because they want to move for their abs. They don't want to stabilize. They don't want to worry about keeping the muscles tight They want to make sure that they can do crunches, they want to do sit-ups, but they don't want to stabilize. And this movement, the polyp press, is all about stabilizing. And I'm telling you guys, it's really, really challenging to actually do it perfectly. What you see in the picture there is a person has a cable coming out from the side, and it's usually at about chest level, right? So what they're doing is they're going to be doing chest presses back and forth, but while loaded from one side. So what's happening is the weight's wanting to pull them over, but your core, your abdominal muscles, the stabilizers in particular, have to be so tight to avoid the body from twisting and rotating. When you do that, you condition those muscles, and all that back pain starts to go away. Your back pain doesn't come from weak prime movers. Your back pain comes from weak stabilizers, the muscles that surround the spine, and they're just holders. So that's a great one for there. And then from there, we progress into your more power movement, because we got to understand, if you're moving slow, there's not a ton of velocity being put on your muscles. So the force is much smaller, because we talked about with power, force equals mass times acceleration. So once we start moving faster, we're demanding more from our body. Let's see here. I believe a majority of people who consider working out that don't have any experience in the field should be properly educated. Yes, 100%, Tessa. I agree with that, and that's why I'm doing it, right? I opened up this workshop and I said, the reason I'm bringing this to people is because there's a lot of people pushing out a lot of workouts out there, but they're way too advanced. And I'm all for it, and I'm happy that people are doing it, but you all need to learn the basics. You need to make sure your body can execute movements properly, not to get hurt for 6 months and then, you know, hate fitness afterwards. So spot on. Absolutely great point, Tessa. So the last movement here is going to be a lateral ball throw. So they see a person's kind of winding up, they're staying perpendicular to the wall, and then they're throwing it laterally, right? So that's using that rotation, the strong core and all that kind of stuff. And of course, there's many variations to it, but these are some primary movements you can find with rotation. So the last one we got now is carry. Anytime you're moving, anytime you're walking around, even just walking is still a basic carry because it's your gait. That's something that we don't think about a lot, is how do you move when you don't do anything, just basic movement when you're walking? Is your body having fundamental breakdown issues? One of the biggest ones I see is when your knees buckle in, right? You see kind of that knock knee. So many people in the world becoming knock knee because we're becoming less active. We're sitting around, our glutes are becoming weak, and the knees are being forced inward. Some of the other things you see, collapsed ankles. We talked about in the beginning, we talked about squats and movements and how important that feet position is. And we see collapsed ankles when people move. And then they're complaining about a hip. Guys, and this is an important point. One broken piece in the chain makes the whole chain broken. So if your foot is not placing correctly how it should be, mid-foot, strong arch, both the arches nice and tight, but it's collapsing instead, well, guess what? Now the ankle shifts, now the foot rotates, now the hip rotates. Now all the way up to your shoulder can be impacted by the way your foot placement is. And oftentimes you'll see an imbalance between one side and the other. You'll notice one ankle stronger, more stable than the other, one foot, one hip, whatever it may be, all those things happen. So let's look at some basics for carry and then we'll finish up. The last thing to talk about real quick is carrying things. Whether you're doing a farmer's carry where you're carrying things in your hand, a front carry, doesn't matter. You're moving with load on your body. And usually what it does, it makes your body offset as you move. So what's really important about carrying is stability. Making sure that when we're moving, we're not shifting side to side, back and forth, right? Whether it be a front carry or like this, or our hips is not wiggling as we're moving forward. We're nice and strong. We're moving straight, right? Everything's controlled. All of our body's structured properly. So it's funny because a lot of times when you carry, you don't think about those floors we talked about in the beginning. And it is important because that's how you're going to make sure that you're carrying things and you can carry heavy things and they don't hurt your body because everything stacks structurally. Everything is moving how it's supposed to. The maximal support for the body is there and we're not relying on a single muscle or a single joint to do all the work. So when you're carrying things, just stay tight, stay aligned, and stay strong through your core. Your abs become really, really important, right? Especially when you're carrying something out right here. If my core is weak and I can't support this weight hanging out here, I'm going to get injured. But if it's not, then I can walk around and be no problem. But otherwise, I'm going to create compensation patterns, shift my weight to try to offset that weight differential. If you're noticing when you're moving, your body's having to offset a lot of weight, most likely your core is weak and you need to work on your abdominal muscles to really build them up. And it's not from crunches and sit-ups. It's deep-rooted stabilizer muscles, right? If you take this abdominal, the six-pack that you all are familiar with off, underneath it there's a sheath that wraps around you. It's designed to protect the spine, keep the hips tight, and everything move how it should be. And those are stabilizers. So a lot of planks, a lot of off-balance exercises, offset exercises will train those muscles to be better support you.
So that was your carry introduction, and now you see, once again, the last piece, the 7th movement progressions. You don't see too often people doing this in the gym, but I'm starting to see it a little bit more since, I've been doing this about, 12 years, and I'm starting to see people doing more and more carries. We've done this for a long time in the really high-level professional world for health, but it's not a common knowledge, but I'm happy to see it's translating there. But anyway, so first one on the very left is walking. Then from there you get into a farmer's carry. Dumbbells, kettlebells, doesn't matter, but we're having to carry something. This is important, guys. When you carry your groceries from your car, you have to pay attention. I guarantee it, when you're carrying your groceries from a car, most likely it's going to look like this. Shoulders are rounded, everything's overhanging, and when you look at your rib cage floor and your hip floor and your neck floor, and they're not going to be aligned, because you're not conditioned to doing these things properly and your body has contraindications, movement pattern issues. Then you get to a single side, right? When we're offset with one side versus the other, core has to be much more engaged in order to keep us even. And that's funny, like I'll see people doing that, but then they're leaning over to that side. I'm like, you're not doing anything. The goal is to have the offset in that side, but notice how her weight is not shifting one way or another. She's moving, but she's able to stay even though there is more load on one side. That's what core training is all about. That's what your core is designed to do. Then you get into a front-loaded carry. With front-loaded carry, right, something is in the front, whether it be like a goblet, whether it be like this, like a Zerch carry or whatever. Now we're loading. Now the core is a lot more loaded because it's not just hanging. We're not having support. We have to hold something, not just let it hang. Then from there, you get into an overhead carry, right? So mixed grip carry, and you're going to get your one side, and then one side's down. That's going to be mixed carry. So one side is going to be hanging down, one side's overhead, and then finally an overhead carry. Overhead carry is the hardest because there's so much happening to the spine. If you have a tight spine, weak core, you're going to arch your back, and you're going to compress all those discs when you're doing that, and it's not going to feel good. It's going to be damaging to your body, so I don't advise it. So guys, really, this is it. This was your introduction to movement, and I'm not saying just by watching this you guys get this down. You need to go back and now understanding these things, go through this and actually do these exercises and watch yourself in the mirror. Take a look in the mirror and see, okay, I'm seeing a shift there. I'm seeing a shift there. Okay, what's going on, right? Most likely my core is weak. Take a look and see what's tight, what needs to be released, what muscles are weak, things like that. And then work on it and progress. And guys, if this is something you're interested in, I want to help. I don't want to do this for 2 or 3, 5 people. I will give you free workouts. I will do live sessions because I'm sitting at home anyway. We just got told that we're quarantined till I think the 17th of April. So I'm happy to do these workouts. Just let me know. If you guys comment in the comments and say I want to show up, tag me. If I get like 10 to 20 people showing up, I'll gladly do these workouts. The difference between what I want to do for you, which and many others are doing, is I just want to start with basics. I want to teach you programming. I want to teach you progression, where we start with very foundational movements. We progress, move forward until we get to doing backflips if you want to. Whatever you want to do, we can get there. But comment and let me know if this is something you're interested in. I'd love to be able to offer that. If not, I'll just keep doing my own thing.